The Champions of Chaos DLC brings Valkia, Vilitch, Festus and Azazel to Total War Warhammer 3, along with a whole bunch of new units. And as there are a hell of a lot of new units in this DLC, I'm going to go through some of the more exciting ones in more detail, but a lot of the reskin / variant units I will be a little bit more brief on. So, let us begin. Kicking off with the Bloody Lady herself, Valkia, a legendary lord for the Warriors of Chaos and for Khorne. She's a melee lord with pretty decent stats all across the board. Maybe was expecting a little more weapon strength, but she does have Frenzy, so she will have more than 400 most of the time. She does have armor piercing and a bonus versus large, so she's going to be wanting to hunt down those large targets. She does have a good bit of armor on, some melee defense, and she can fly, so she can get out of trouble if necessary. Should be able to keep herself alive pretty well. Does have the magical and fire attacks on her melee attack too, so she's pretty versatile overall. For her abilities, she has the Spear Sleipnir, which is a wind attack. Decent damage, 50% armor piercing. Think Chillwind from the Lore of Dark. It's that kind of spell. Good against a line of infantry or some clumped up infantry. Then she has Demon Shield, which will make her invulnerable for 13 seconds, so she cannot take any damage for its duration. Pretty powerful if you go into a fight with a strong enemy. Also with that mobility, she could dive in, use this ability, get some damage in on something, and then fly out of there before she takes any damage. She also causes fear, has immunity to psychology. She has Frenzy, as I mentioned, so that's a nice damage boost. She has the Gaze of Khorne, which is an area buff, so she'll buff up her nearby troops, extra damage and leadership for them. Helpful support ability with that one. And another support ability in the Scarlet Armor, which will reduce enemy base and armor piercing damage up to 20%, with the intensity increasing with each kill made by Valkia herself. So much like in her trailer, she's going to be best off fighting on the front line alongside her troops, helping them out. So that is Valkia. Moving on to Festus the Chin Lord. He is primarily a spellcaster support lord, as he doesn't have fantastic combat stats. You'll especially have to watch him with that low 30 armor. He will make up for this somewhat though with extra melee defense from abilities and healing potentially in his abilities and spells, which is really where he shines. Firstly, with his healing elixirs. This is one of the two mutually exclusive abilities. This will give healing to himself and all nearby friendly units while it's active, and it will be constantly active. Unless you switch over to use Harbinger of Pestilence, the other side of the mutually exclusive ability, which brings direct damage. So he becomes like a Mortis engine, essentially doing damage to everything around him constantly until you switch back over to the healing ability. And then he also has Pestilent Potions, which will reduce the enemy damage output, essentially helping to protect you and your boys, and that will spread to 5 other units up to 100 meters away. So that's his unique abilities. Other than that, he does have the Lore of Nurgle to use, so you can either use him as a doctor to heal up your troops. If you keep him in with the front line, he's going to keep them healed and help them survive as the Nurgle units do. Or if you find that your units are struggling to put out damage against their specific enemy, you can charge him in and put him in that Harbinger of Pestilence mode, and he will do damage directly over time. That's Festus. On to Vilitch the Curseling then, who is a bit of a caster / melee lord. Pretty decent combat stats, although lacking armor piercing. Does have his barrier though, so can be pretty tough and great for diving into lightly armored crowds of infantry. Where Vilitch is going to shine though, of course, is in the magic department. He has the Lore of Tzeentch, pretty standard for the Tzeentch Lords, but the abilities is where he can stand out a bit more. He has Fires of Change, that's part of the Lore of Tzeentch. Then we've got Paragon of Change. This will replenish the barrier hit points of nearby friendly units. That essentially is like a heal, keeping friendlies safe from damage. Then we've got the Twisted Twin, which will increase melee defense, melee attack, and spell mastery. Effect intensity increases with time spent in melee or casting spells. So whether you're using Tommen or Vilitch, as long as you're doing some kind of fighting, you're going to benefit. And then you've got Vessel of Chaos, which will again replenish barrier hit points when casting with Vilitch. So he's going to be very much a damage dealer, wanting to be in melee and to be casting spells to put out damage and do whatever he can, but also quite supportive in the barrier replenishment. Again, going to be wanting to fight alongside units to make use of that. So that's Vilitch. And lastly then, to Azazel, the legendary lord for Slanesh, who is pretty decent in melee, but is also a spellcaster. He's got some nice melee attacks, 70 magical attacks, big armor-piercing weapon strength, so he's a pretty good damage dealer. But in true Slanesh fashion, he's a bit of a glass cannon because he only has 5 armor. He can fly though, of course, so he has the ability to get out of trouble if needed. Onto his abilities, first of all, Temptator. Plus 25 melee damage reflection and a 20% damage resistance. Great if he's in a crowd and he's being attacked from many angles. Pop this to throw a bit of damage back at the attacker. And then he has the Demon Blade, which will give him a nice little damage boost, but more importantly, inflict Discouraged on his enemies, which is a massive minus 16 leadership penalty. Pretty dangerous for a late game battle ability. And then he just has the Law of Slanesh, so all the spells that you would expect there. So plenty of damage dealing opportunities or support opportunities from that. He also causes fear and terror, the only one of these lords to cause terror. Has Strider, that's kind of part of his Slanesh ability, although he can fly, so you know. Has Devastating Flanker because of course he's great at hitting it from the back. And Azazel is the only demon of these four lords as well. He's got the instability and the banishment, got Blissful Rapture as part of the Slanesh lore. But Azazel also has Domineering Aura, another debuff which will reduce enemy melee attack and melee defense, intensity increasing with each unit in range with leadership wavering or lower. So basically, if a unit starts to get scared, Azazel is going to be sure to try and scare it off. So some pretty powerful abilities for Azazel, especially if comboed up with some of the magic and stuff. He's got that melee power as well, so a pretty strong lord overall. That's Azazel. On then to the units, beginning with a completely new unit type with the Chaos War Shrine. This being the undivided version, and there are 4 other versions for each of the mono gods. We're going to look at those, although not with the stats because they're pretty much the same. You can see stats-wise though, it's nothing really to write home about because that's not what this thing is about. It's not built for doing damage despite the massive hulking size. This is more of a support vehicle, shall we say. Given its hulking size, it is a bit of a bullet magnet, but that's kind of a good thing because it does have a lot of health, so it can function as a damage soak if you want it to. Although that may be the case even if you don't want it to. Either way, the abilities is where this thing really shines. It causes fear, has Encourage, which has gone back up to giving 8 leadership depending on proximity to the unit. With this one, it has the Giver of Glory, which will give a 10% physical resistance, and as it says, effect intensity increases with each nearby entity death. So that means things just have to die near this thing for it to count. It doesn't have to kill them itself. So this version of the Chaos War Shrine has more of a defensive protection ability, and it's this ability that's going to change with the different variations, as you'll see in a minute. They also have Favor of the Ruinous Power, which gives plus 10 leadership to the nearby area. So couple that up with Encourage, which gives 8 leadership to the closest units. That's 18 leadership to any nearby unit, helping everything to fight longer. So these Chaos War Shrines are massive support units designed to fight alongside your troops. And here's the Khorne version, which as you can imagine is slightly more of a damage dealer. It does have Frenzy, but still the War Shrine is to function as a support unit. So the stats are very similar, the abilities are very similar, although this one does have an immunity to psychology, has that Frenzy that I mentioned, although that's only for itself. But it then has the Giver of Furious Glory, which will increase base weapon damage, armor piercing damage, and melee attack for nearby friendly units. Again, increasing with entity death. So all this thing has to do is stand nearby the action and it will be able to help out. And then it has the same one as before, plus 10 leadership, ruinous powers, blah blah blah. You get the idea. They all give the extra leadership, has Encourage as well, so the 18 leadership for this one too. Has the spell resistance because it's a Khorne unit. So you can see it's pretty much the same as the previous unit, but instead of giving physical resistance, it gives a damage boost instead because Khorne. What about Papa Nurgle's version then? Well, again, stats very similar. It might have a little more melee defense, maybe more health to be more tanky, because that's Nurgle, right? Ability-wise, it has the similar stuff, except Giver of Abundant Glory, which gives healing per second. Again, increases intensity with entity death. So again, another kind of Mortis engine of healing alongside Festus, which kind of feels like things are going to be invincible in the Nurgle army, but we'll see. And of course, Favor of the Ruinous Powers, so that extra leadership again as well. So it's just going to serve to make Nurgle armies even more tanky, especially if you put 2 or 3 of these in an army. I guess that works. Going to be crazy. And then there's the Slanesh version, which is a little bit faster than the others. It has Sephoric Musk, so it will reduce enemy melee defense and melee attack by 5. That's just part of its stats. Has a few other abilities that the others don't, just because it's a Slanesh unit like Strider. Has that immunity to psychology again. For its unique ability though, that's different from the other ones, Giver of Torturous Glory, a direct damage over an area, increases with entity death. This thing is literally just a Mortis engine. You put it in a crowd and it does damage, passive damage I should say, alongside its attack damage. So yeah, Slanesh's version, basically a Mortis engine. You got the leadership as well, and a physical resistance. That's part of the Slanesh deal. The only issue with this one potentially is the speed of it. It is faster than the other war shrines, but it's not quite as fast as demonettes, right? So if you've got an army of demonettes rushing up super quick, this thing will be left behind. And lastly, there's the Tzeentch version, which of course has the barrier, so it's going to be maybe a little more tanky than some of the others, although maybe not the Nurgle one, and it'll have the magical attacks as well. For its unique ability, it has Giver of Arcane Glory, which will of course increase spell mastery and power recharge, increasing with the death of nearby enemies, obviously. So in true Tzeentch fashion, it will make your magic stronger, as one would expect. Still get the leadership buffs as well. Nice. Moving on now to 4 new regiments of renown units, 1 for each of the Chaos Mono Gods, starting with quite possibly the new coolest looking unit in the game, Knights of the Brazen Throne. Regiment of Renown Skull Crushers. So these have slightly buffed up stats, still big hard-hitting damage dealers, bonus versus infantry, armor piercing, good for absolutely smashing infantry to pieces, especially as they have an ability that buffs up their charge. It gives them plus 50% mass, more charge bonus, more charge speed, just makes them hit like an absolute double-decker tank. Not to mention they cause fear and terror, so are going to absolutely just terrorize everybody. For Nurgle, we've got Bilious Guff, who is a Chaos Giant, pretty much similar old stats, nice big weapon strength, got poison attacks as a Nurgle unit, terror of course, but Guff by name, Guff by nature, because, well, this. Can you even imagine the smell from a Nurgle Giant's diet? Christ! That ability is actually a vortex spell that you can activate when you want to, that will not only damage the nearby units, but it'll also reduce their armor by 30, and that will spread to 5 other nearby units, or 4 other nearby units. So 5 in total. Nasty. And then perhaps a less exciting unit in the Sibilant Slaughtercade for Slanesh. It's another Chariot. It has poison attacks, it does Chariot things, it has devastating flanker, it does Vanguard deployment, has a unique ability called Soul Hunters, which gives it a damage resistance and more damage with the more stuff it kills. But otherwise, you're just going to use it like every other Chariot in the Slanesh army, so yeah. And finally for Tzeentch, how about some Regiment of Renown Aspiring Champions, the Severed Claw. There is only 16 of them in the unit, but they have some big weapon strength, which is armor piercing, and a bonus versus large magical attacks as well. They of course have the barrier, so bringing a really elite anti-large option to the Tzeentch army, something they've certainly been lacking. And as aspiring champions, they do have the Encourage ability, giving that 8 leadership to nearby friendly units. Now to the last bunch of units I'm going to go through in detail, as they are the best of the best. It's the various kinds of Chosen. Chosen of Khorne here. As you can see, big tough stats, lots of melee defense, fire damage as well. Gonna have Frenzy, so they're going to do a little more damage than they appear. Much like the Warriors of Chaos Chosen though, they don't have armor piercing. But with tons of armor, a silver shield, lots of health, they are going to be absolute tanks and going to be the best choice for holding the front line if you want one that will not break and run away for a long old time. If you want a front line that's a bit more killy though and less about holding the line, then you can go with the dual weapon version of Chosen of Khorne. They've lost the shield but still got the big armor and decent melee defense. Big old weapon strength, still no armor piercing though, which is kind of surprising with those massive axes, but they do have a bonus versus infantry, so they will absolutely savage any enemy front line. Although they'll be slightly less efficient if the enemy is heavily armored. And of course remember they have Frenzy, so the stats will be a little buffed up from what you're looking at there. Onto the Chosen of Nurgle. First up, the tanky Hold the Line version, which has more health than anybody else. Still got the big armor, silver shield, incredibly slow though, only 23 speed. That's a Nurgle thing, right? You're a bit slow. Massive melee defense, however, at 65, so these ones a little bit less about the damage, more about the holding power when they finally arrive to the front line at least. And of course they have poison, reducing enemy damage output, helping them to survive even longer. But there is a big damage dealer version as well, as there is Chosen of Nurgle Great Weapons. Still incredibly slow, but they have a big old axe, which brings armor piercing, so something over the Khorne version. Although these ones do have slightly less melee attack than others, perhaps at only 43, but still got that poison, still got the toughness with the extra health and armor. Some nice armor piercing for Nurgle though. For the Chosen of Slanesh, very similar to the regular Chaos Undivided Chosen, still very tough, got great melee defense, good hold the line unit, but they have those extra Slanesh abilities. Strider, so they'll be able to traverse the land a little bit easier than everybody else, immunity to psychology, and a 10% physical resistance, so they'll have that for a little bit of extra toughness. If they're not tough enough though, there is the Hellscourge version of the Chosen of Slanesh, which are pretty much the same thing, just even better and more defensive. They have a little more melee defense, they have a charge defense and charge reflection, still the physical resistance too, so if you want the toughest damn holding unit of all, you're going to get the Chosen Hellscourges. The two Slanesh Chosens are slightly faster than the others as well at 33 speed. And for the Chosen of Tzeentch, it's pretty much the same deal as all the other Chosen. These are the tough hold the line version. Not really anything too different about these other than that they have magical attacks and most notably their barrier, of course. So still very tough, still very tanky, still very frontline holdy guys. At only 28 speed though, you're probably not going to be able to cycle charge them to recharge their barrier. And for the Chosen variant of Tzeentch, it's a halberd version that is of course anti-large. Nice armor piercing, still got the magical attacks, barriers. A solid, reliable, anti-large unit for Tzeentch, something he was certainly missing before, although we do have that Regiment of Renown unit we looked at just now, the Severed Claw, the Aspiring Champions with halberds, very similar to this unit, but hey, now you got both Tzeentch fans. So that is all the new Chosen for the Mono God factions. Alright, from here is where we're going to start skimming through the units a lot quicker, but allow me to set it up and to help you understand before we get going. So the units we're about to look at are all the variants, or reskins if you like, of the Warriors of Chaos different units, whether that's Chaos Marauders, Chaos Warriors, the Chosen we've just seen, Chaos Knights, whatever. To make them a variant of a certain monogod, you simply add these different traits. If you want to make a unit into a Khorne unit, you give it Frenzy so it does more damage and ultimately make it more of a damage dealer in its stats. That means giving it a little more weapon strength, a little more melee attack maybe, perhaps less melee defense though. It may have fire damage as well, that's a pretty common Khorne trait, and they'll have spell resist because that's just standard on all Khorne units. If it's a Nurgle unit, you'll give it a slightly bigger health pool, you'll give it more melee defense, and it'll have poison attacks. It'll also maybe be a bit slower than most. If you want to make a Slanesh unit, you'll make it faster than most, you'll give it the devastating flanker ability, you'll make it immune to psychology, you'll make it have Strider so it can run up hills easier and not get tired, and you'll give it a 10% physical resistance, because that's what Slanesh units have. If you want to make it a Tzeentch unit, you'll simply give it a barrier and magical attacks. So remember all of this as we go through these units. They're just the Chaos Undivided Warriors of Chaos version with these traits thrown on top of them. So if you've got a regular Chaos Undivided Chaos Marauder, and then you want to make it a Khorne version, you just put all of those traits on top. If you want to make it a Nurgle version, put all the Nurgle traits on top. You get the idea, right? So just keep all that in mind as a rough guideline throughout this. First of all, some Lords and Heroes. There is a Slanesh Chaos Lord and a Khorne Chaos Lord. So a couple of generic Lords, melee Lords for those two. I'm not going to go through all the stats and abilities of all these though, because otherwise the video will be like an hour long. This is why I call this the skimming part. Now while Slanesh and Khorne got a generic melee lord, Nurgle and Tzeentch got a generic Chaos Sorcerer Lord. So they'll be able to bring the magic. So this gives us a few cheaper options for lords that aren't legendary ones or simply the heralds of the monogods. Each Chaos Monogod faction also got their own Demon Prince version as well though, so another kind of more generic lord, but still very powerful. Some of them are casters, some of them are pure melee, they can fly. The Nurgle one looks especially cool here. They've all got different abilities and things to serve different purposes, so very cool. Some nice more generic options for our lords that don't have to always be legendary. Pretty cool. To the heroes, there is an exalted hero of Khorne. This boy you might recognize from the Azazel trailer. Everyone was more impressed with him than they were with Azazel. He's of course a damage dealer, got a bunch of abilities, he's got a bunch of mounts he can use. Doesn't have armor piercing though, the same as the Chosen with the dual axes. For some reason they don't have armor piercing, even though they really look like they should. I think he has a bonus versus infantry, so going to be good for killing those crowds. That's the exalted hero of Khorne. There's also an exalted hero of Nurgle who does have armor piercing with his big old two-handed axe. And remember, he's going to have all those traits that I pointed out to you just now. He's going to have more HP, he's going to have more melee defense, he's going to have poison, he's going to be a bit slower most likely. But you can get him mounts, you can put him on a horse, you can put him on a chariot, so he won't be super slow. For Slanesh, he got a caster hero. Again, you can have them on mounts, you can bring the magic with them. They're still pretty tough, as you can see, they're pretty heavily clad in armor. So a slightly tougher spellcaster for Slanesh, and the same with Tzeentch. Instead of just having the squishy cultist, now you've actually got something tough that can bring the magic as well, although, you know, Tzeentch, there's plenty of magic going around anyway. Alright, we're going to divide into factions now for the remainder of the unit, starting with Khorne. Remember all the traits as we go through these. First up, Marauders of Khorne, straight from the Legion of Doom. They've got the shields just like regular Chaos Marauders, but remember they have Frenzy. These don't have fire attacks though, that is a maybe with the fire attacks on various units. There's also a dual weapon version of Chaos Marauders of Khorne. These ones have a bonus versus infantry, so are slightly more killy, and they don't have the shield though, so they're a little bit more vulnerable. But some nice cheap damage dealer potential with these boys. And Khorne has finally got his Forsaken, very much a damage dealer anyway, let alone having Frenzy and stuff on top. If you want a fast frontline, these will be the go-to boys. Then we've got Marauder Horsemen of Khorne, these ones with throwing axes, so they are a ranged unit, which gives something to Khorne that he didn't really have before. So the throwing axes, short range but powerful armor-piercing missiles. Chaos Knights of Khorne, pretty much the same as the normal Chaos Knights, but with the Frenzy and stuff, they'll do a little more damage. Going to be very hard-hitting, but nothing really new to the Khorne roster. He already had hard-hitting cavalry. These, at least a little bit faster, maybe. And then there's the Chaos Knights with Lances version, so these are more of a shock cavalry, bigger charge bonus, harder hitting on the charge. The previous version are more of a melee cav, so you can charge them in and leave them there for a bit, and they'll be okay. So yeah, Chaos Knights. And then finally, just the Chaos Chariots. Pretty much your usual Chaos Chariots with the Khorne version, of course, Frenzy, maybe fire damage on these as well. Look at those fiery hoofs. There's Khorne. Now onto the Nurgle reskins, variants. Chaos Marauders of Nurgle. They're going to have a little more HP, that little more melee defense, poison attacks as well, so they'll be able to survive a little bit better than most perhaps, but they are going to be a little bit slower. Nogal also has Chaos Marauders with great weapons, so some cheap armor piercing, something he was really missing before, so the Nurgle army just gained something really useful to them in this unit. Especially useful early campaigns as well, when you don't have much armor piercing at all. Next, Chaos Warriors of Nurgle, pretty much the same as the Undivided ones, right, but they've got those Nurgle-y traits, so they were already a holding unit in the Undivided version, now they're even more like that because they got the more health, the extra melee defense, the poison, a super holdy, tanky unit, and something with some armor, again, something Nurgle was really lacking before, pretty important for him. And then there's Chaos Warriors with great weapons, so more armor piercing for Nurgle, still got the toughness of having all the Nurgle traits though, but alas, remember that Nurgle units are pretty slow, and these boys being heavy, they are probably going to be very, very slow. Or not probably, I can tell you they are very, very slow. Just like the Chosen. And then the Marauder Horsemen of Nurgle, who have throwing axes, again like the Khorne version, short range, armor piercing though, and they have the poison attack on that, which will help them to not be caught if pursued by enemies, and this unit does fill another big hole of the Nurgle army with some mobility and a ranged unit. And speaking of mobility, Chaos Knights of Nurgle, of course, they are a tankier version, and as a melee cavalry where they're okay to stay in melee, they're going to be even better at that job with the Nurgle traits and with all the Nurgle healing that can go on. But again, some really nice mobility and something that can really hammer an anvil better than Funky Toads. Sorry, Funky Toads. And again, there is a Chaos Knights with Lances version. These ones more about cycle charging and making use of their charge bonus. Just another nice option for Nurgle. And guess what? There's a Chaos Chariot of Nurgle as well. It's a chariot. You know what they do. Just apply those Nurgle-y traits and you get the idea. On to Slanesh then. I think you know mostly what's coming by this point though, but here we go anyway. Starting off with the Chaos Warriors of Slanesh, because of course Slanesh already had Marauders in his army since the release of Warhammer 3, so nothing new in that department. But having Chaos Warriors for Slanesh, you get a big shield, you get some big armor, you've got a unit that's actually tough. Much like the Chosen, you've now got a much cheaper version in the Chaos Warriors, so you can have a tough holding front line, something new for Slanesh. There's also a Hellscourge version. Again, just like the Chosen, there's a Hellscourge version. Pretty much the same thing as it was with the Chosen. This version is a bit tougher, a bit better at holding the line. They are a bit faster than other Chaos Warriors as well, and the same traits as before. They've got the physical resistance, they've got Strider, they've got immunity to psychology, so a really nice addition and a big hole filler for the Slanesh roster. Slanesh also got his Forsaken now as well. Same thing as the Khorne one, it's just going to give you a nice fast frontline option. But they do have the devastating flanker trait, so maybe you want to flank with them instead. So a similar role to Demonettes really, but at least they have some armor on. And the last infantry also joining the roster is the Mirror Guard, because Sigvold joined the Slanesh roster, they've of course come along as well. Pretty much just a tough holding unit, but they have a trait that will give plus 10 melee defense to nearby lords and heroes, so they're a good bodyguard of course. Next, something pretty special for Slanesh because he didn't have any ranged units at all before, now he does with Marauder Horsemen. So a big hole filled in the Slanesh roster with these, still not very long range, but at least it's something to use for range. You can finally attack things in the air, you can use a bit of skirmishing, a nice addition for Slanesh. They do have magical attacks on their weapon strength as well, so nice. Then there's the Chaos Knights of Slanesh, of course, another good addition as it gives them some tougher cavalry. They had a lot of good cavalry before, very fast, but not great for holding and staying alive. Well, now they've got that. And especially with the Lances version, nice big damage with the charge on that, so great for hammer and anvil. They have devastating flanker as well, so they're going to be even more ridiculous on the rear charge. Pretty scary for the Slanesh roster. And then there's Chaos Chariots of Slanesh, although he's already got a million chariots, so this isn't really bringing anything that great for him. Maybe a bit of toughness as it is a slightly armored chariot. More heckin' chariots. Lastly then, to the Tzeentch roster. Again, you know what's coming. Marauders of Tzeentch, pretty much your standard Marauder, but with the barrier, that can be pretty nice for an early game unit to have. And of course the magical attacks will help here and there as well, especially against those demons. And Tzeentch gets a spear version of these as well, so no armor piercing, but he does get the spears, so a nice bit of cheap anti-large at your disposal. Again, the barrier is going to be really nice on this early game unit. But barriers are really going to shine with the Chaos Warriors of Tzeentch, now giving Tzeentch a tough front line, something they didn't have at all before in any form. So yeah, with that barrier, as I say, and the magical attacks, going to be some nice options and a big hole filler for the Tzeentch roster. There's also Chaos Warriors with Halberds, so an anti-large choice. Tough again, got the barrier again, so just going to be really good at filling the anti-large hole for Tzeentch. And guess what? There's Marauder Horsemen as well. These ones, though, with Warp Fire Flame on their ranged attack, which is pretty good. That'll reduce armor and give a weakness to fire. That could be very powerful teamed up with other fire-causing units of the Tzeentch army. Pretty cool, and gives that mobility in the cavalry, although Tzeentch was pretty mobile already. And on to the Chaos Knights with Lances for Tzeentch. Of course, there was already a Chaos Knights without Lances version for Tzeentch from release, so nothing new there, but now you've got the hard-hitting, cycle-charging version. Very nice. And lastly, guess what? Chaos Knight Chariot. Yay! It's got a barrier. Barrier actually very nice for a chariot, because they generally need to keep moving all the time and not getting touched and taking any damage. You could charge them in and leave them there for a second, let that barrier go down, and then bugger off and let it recharge and go back in again. So these chariots might well be invincible. Good stuff. And lastly, Tzeentch also gained the Weird Spawn, a regiment of renown from before. They have armor sundering, magical attacks, physical resistance, just pretty much as they were before, I believe. So there we go. That's all the new units in the Champions of Chaos DLC. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the future.